I'm from the Beaver, and I'm interviewing Professor Peter Swann. And the first question we'd like to ask you, please, is why do you think innovation is such an important topic in economic analysis? What made you interested as a student?
Well, I was lucky enough to start studying this as a PhD student at the beginning of the personal computer revolution, where the hype level, as in Judith Shapiro's graph, would have been off the scale in terms of it, but this one had no downswing, it just went straight on upwards. So it really was a very happy coincidence of time. I mean, I'd always been interested in computing. I'd studied maths, I'd studied computer science as an undergraduate, and I'd sort of done things with mainframe computers, which was quite fun. I didn't want to spend my life doing it. So I sort of knew it was important. I had no idea how important it was economically. It soon turned out to be not a very good subject to study if you wanted a nice, tidy econometric model, because it just didn't work very well. But I thought it was interesting. And then as I went on and looked back into the history of economics and discovered that actually lots of big people had thought about it, Adam Smith, Babbage, Karl Marx, John Stuart Mill, and so on and so on and so on. Actually, it was potentially very important indeed. And then I think by the end of the PhD, we were starting to see, the personal computer revolution is actually pretty important. It wasn't necessarily showing up as in productivity statistics, but in terms of, the amount of use people were making of it. So that's my answer to the first one.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it is. So, second question: how important and effective has publicly funded infrastructure and the national measurement system in particular been in supporting innovation?
Okay, that's a very well-researched question, because one of the more improbable topics I've studied is what's the role of standards and the national measurement infrastructure in supporting innovation. Now, most people would say to the first, how do standards promote innovation? Surely they're all about constraining innovation. What we actually discover is that standards support and constrain at the same time. Particularly in computer technologies, a lot of high-tech industries, standards make it easier to get your innovation to sell because you know what everyone else is going to do. It's a sort of coordination device. So all I can say is that people were a bit skeptical about the role of standards, and I'll come on to measurement in a minute. In the early days, have realised actually it's the sort of foundation on which people add their innovations to the pot and know that they'll work with what everyone else is doing because they're conforming to the standard. As for the national measurement system, it's always been said, why can't companies just do this themselves? Why does public money need to be spent on it? And I think the key thing there is you need to have something that is available both to producer and consumer at the same time. If you, not necessarily as an individual, but if consumer bodies on your behalf are going to test whether a particular product conforms to what it's supposed to be doing and is performing as well as it does, somebody's got to have access to the sort of measurement technologies you need to say how well it's working. So, for example, if you're buying some food and on the label it says this is the constituents of this, if you have an eating disorder or you have some allergy or something, you really need to know that these things are accurate. Now that means there must be a publicly available measurement technology. If it's only monopolized by a company, then how can you as an individual check that? So funnily enough, the measurement infrastructure turns out to be incredibly important, if nothing else, just as a means of saying this gives us something that demonstrates that this product which you're trying to sell me is as good as you say it is. And that's important economically. Without that, I might not trust you. Not you personally, but you.
Thank you. So, thirdly, which models of university business interaction do you think are more conducive to innovation?
Yeah, that's a very good question also. When I was about your age, so when I was an undergraduate student, there was a lot of talk about something called the customer contractor model for funding of of science, and basically the idea was that a government department or a business would basically write out a contract with what they wanted, and then the scientists would have to deliver to that contract. So that was the model. So it didn't leave much open for sort of blue skies thinking. I think my experience in collaborating with business, now this is only in the area of economics and what I described as hybrid economics at the lecture, that actually when I talk to companies, I expect them to be most helpful with the sort of the very applied side of the work. Actually, they're most helpful with the blue sky stuff, because that's what they really want to talk about. They want to talk about how might we use this in a way that would transform a market or transform the performance of a company, or open up some completely new application or something of that sort. So what I'd love it to see it as unstructured as possible, with as few as far away from the customer contractor principle as possible, not too many contracts and some nice blue skies thinking, because actually I think that's what companies want when they talk. They don't want to academics, they don't want consultancy. They'll go to consultants if they want consultancy. What they want is blue skies stuff from us.
Yeah. So lastly, thank you. How important do you find multidisciplinary approaches in your own research?
Okay. Yeah. Well, I talked a bit about that in the lecture. I mean, I'll blur over the distinction between multidisciplinary, transdisciplinary, and cross-disciplinary, and the various other sorts. But am I interested in using lots of disciplines? Yes, I am. And the reason for that at the beginning was when I tried essentially using conventional economic methods to quantify some of the effects I was interested in. I couldn't really make much progress. The estimates that one got were really, they were simply not credible. They didn't make economic sense, and I suspected this was to do with some particular econometric problems that at that time were insoluble, possibly insoluble even now. Whereas there were other techniques developed in engineering, one very important theorem out of physics, some ideas coming out of the sociology of consumption, which actually gave you a much better idea of the question. So, I mean, I'm strictly an economist. I'm none of those other things, but I always found it useful to go to them, much as you'd go to a library and say, "Hey, I'll read a bit about that," and that would open up. Now, so I think in the economics of innovation, the general consensus amongst most people working in that field, certainly in Britain and even more so in Europe, is that you can't do it just from an economics perspective alone. You have to bring in some other collaboration, or you have to read some of these other disciplines.
That's been the conventional sort of point of view for how many years now? Is this sort of canonized?
I would say since the late 80s. Sorry, yeah, late 80s. Yeah. So what does that make? 25 years or more. Yeah.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.
Cheers.
Yeah, sure.